Tonight on Reporting Scotland, Scottish exports are growing, but where we're sending them is fueling the political debate on both Brexit and independence. Still no agreement at Holyrood as the budget deadline gets closer. David Goodwillie leaves Plymouth Argyle a week after he was judged to be a rapist in a civil case. Declassified CIA documents reveal that an American submarine crashed with a Soviet sub in the Clyde at the height of the Cold War.
It's an embarrassment, really, to the American and British forces that they could get that close in.
Also in the programme, we'll be taking the bus, the walking bus. It's cutting truancy and improving school performance. Good evening. Scottish exports are up across the board in the UK, to the EU and other international markets. The Scottish Government figures show that sales from Scotland to the rest of the UK are 4 times as big as those to the EU. But ministers here claim that this could all change after Brexit and that it's vital Scotland stays in the single European market. Here's our business and economy editor, Douglas Fraser.
Let 1,000 turbines bloom. This factory has just hit 4-figure sales of its farm-scale wind generator 6 years after its owner relocated the business from Holland to Glasgow. Trade winds bring orders from around the world. Most turbines used to go to UK customers, but with subsidy cuts in Britain, now most custom is foreign.
There's a lot of unclarity in Britain, in Europe, but also, I mean, we sell turbines in the US. If the US is building walls around it, then export to the US will get more difficult. So there is a lot of unclarity, but at times when a lot of things change, there's also always a lot of new opportunities.
The increase in wind power is one of the reasons why Scotland is selling more beyond its borders. The total increase in sales in 2015 was around about 4%. Now, of that, £50 billion was sold to the rest of the United Kingdom. Sold beyond there, the rest of the world, £29 billion. And within that, about £12 billion was sold to the rest of the European Union. Viewed from Holyrood, ministers say these export figures prove Scots must maintain free access to European markets.
We of course appreciate the extent to which our nearest neighbour, the rest of the UK, is extremely important, but that doesn't mean to say we should not also have an eye on the huge additional potential that we can have for Scotland's economy from the rest of the EU, and the worst thing to do would be to jeopardise that by the hard Brexit now being proposed by the Tory government.
Viewed from Westminster, ministers say Scottish business and jobs are much more reliant on British markets.
4 times as many exports go to the rest of the United Kingdom than go to the EU. Of course the EU is important, but let's focus on our partners and friends in the rest of the UK, because that's where the really significant impact from our economy is coming, and we shouldn't be doing anything at all to prejudice that.
Most sales to the rest of Britain are services rather than goods, but the biggest single element in these export figures is whisky. Today publishing research showing it's the biggest net contributor to Britain's trade position. And the biggest national export market for Scotch and much more besides remains the United States.
We will be looking for a UK-US trade deal that improves trade between our two countries.
All the more important there's a good trade deal when Theresa May visits the White House on Friday and talks trade with President Donald Trump, not a man with a liking for Scottish wind turbines.
Well, Douglas joins me now. Douglas, these annual figures wouldn't normally lead our programme, but in the wake of what's been happening politically, they do, and they are especially significant.
Yes, and remember these precede the Brexit vote. There's been a bit of an economic slowdown since then. They don't tell us anything about imports, and there's a warning to be cautious about the figures for the sales to the rest of the UK. But all of that said, they give us some indication of where Scotland's economic trading interests lie, though of course that can change. And indeed, Britain is removing the key pillar for the past 40 years of its trading relationship with a promise that there will be new pillars put in place. But underlying this debate in Scotland is the question of how the independence movement builds the economic case if there's to be a move to another Scottish independence referendum. We're told that's becoming more likely because of the working out of the politics of Brexit. One of the things that the SNP and others in the movement will want to explain if there's to be another referendum campaign is how Scotland's trading relationships might work if Scotland were in Europe and outside the UK. And because there's so much uncertainty about Britain's trading relationships, then it looks like a choice of two very uncertain trading futures. These figures give us some help, if only in locating the starting point for that choice.
Douglas, thank you. A budget debate at Holyrood has ended in stalemate after MSPs were unable to agree tax and spending plans. Opposition parties set out their price for backing the Scottish Government's plan, but none of the motions before Parliament won enough support. The Finance Secretary has warned that if the budget stalls, public spending will be put at risk. Here's our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr.
So this is a talking mannequin.
A state-of-the-art dummy for training medical staff, as the First Minister announced extra funding to support student nurses. But the Scottish Government's having to sweat it out in their budget as they cast around for another party's support. This dummy's suffered severe cuts. Labour say that same fate awaits local services and called on Holyrood not to back the budget.
Labour are not behaving in a responsible way. You know, we have a budget process. Labour are just being destructive and haven't actually brought forward any reasonable suggestions.
Well, Labour want big changes.
This £327 million cut in this year's budget will mean more jobs going and even greater pressure on staff and services that are already struggling to cope.
They want a penny on the basic rate of income tax, but the Finance Secretary warned what would happen if the budget wasn't supported.
It puts all our public services at threat. Crucial public spending that pays for our teachers, our doctors, our nurses, our local government employees and our emergency service workers.
The Greens and the Conservatives then set out their opposing positions on tax.
What it delivers is a situation whereby Scotland becomes the most highly taxed part of the United Kingdom.
Either on the rate or on the thresholds, there is a wide range of ways in which the Scottish Government could raise the revenue.
And the Liberal Democrat leader said don't expect him to roll over and support it. Everyone had to compromise, or else.
Those who have not lifted their shovels and made an attempt to reach an agreement on this budget will bear the responsibility of having an election before us.
Yes, 63, no, 63.
When it came to the vote, MSPs were unable to agree tax and spending plans.
So it's budget stalemate here at Holyrood, but the first really crucial vote is a week tomorrow. By then, ministers will have to have found some support. Andrew Kerr, reporting Scotland, Holyrood.
The Scotland international striker David Goodwillie has left Plymouth Argyle by mutual consent. It comes 8 days after a judge ruled that he and another footballer, David Robertson, had raped a woman. Mr Goodwillie asked to leave his club to focus on a possible appeal. Well, I'm joined by our Home Affairs correspondent, Revel Alderson. So, Revel, is this the end of his footballing career?
Well, it certainly doesn't look good for a man who was capped for Scotland 3 times, scoring 1 international goal. He was the subject of a £2.8 million move from Dundee United to Blackburn Rovers a few years ago. Recently he's been playing for Plymouth Argyle in the English League 2, the 4th tier of English football. And in a statement this afternoon, the club said that he'd asked them to terminate his contract so he could focus his time on a potential appeal. We don't know what the grounds of appeal will be, but that is likely to come before the Court of Session later on.
Given the verdict, how difficult would such an appeal be?
Well, it would be difficult. Bear in mind, of course, that Mr Goodwillie was not in court in a criminal case. He was in court because a woman, Denise Clare, claimed that he and David Robertson, a former teammate of his, had raped her during a party. Now, she was suing them. It was a civil action. And the judge ruled, in fact, that he believed that they had raped her, and he awarded her £100,000 in damages. Now, David Goodwillie could appeal against the level of damages being awarded, but it did emerge that he had offered Miss Clare something more than that, more than £100,000, to avoid going to court. So that would be difficult. Secondly, it would be difficult if he is trying to get the finding of the judge overturned because the judge ruled that he found neither footballer to be credible or reliable in their evidence. So appeal judges would have effectively to second guess the original judge when he made his decision. So for the time being, Mr Goodwillie is without a club and he is concentrating on his appeal. It hasn't been lodged yet. He has 21 days to do that from 8 days ago. So we'll see what happens, but it doesn't look as if he'll be playing football at any level anytime soon.
Neil, thank you. In the week that an unarmed missile fired from a Faslane-based submarine caused huge political debate, how about the news that two enemy submarines actually collided off the west coast of Scotland? Well, it did happen, but it was more than 40 years ago. Details of the incident involving a US and a Soviet vessel were contained in a top-secret CIA memo, which has just been declassified. Andrew Black has the details.
This is Scottish CND's appeal.
It's the 1970s and anti-nuclear campaigners are protesting against the presence of US nuclear submarines at Holy Loch. During the Cold War, Russian and US subs engaged in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, and now details of one particularly serious encounter have come to light. A top-secret memo sent to the then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in November 1974, which has just been declassified by the CIA, revealed a crash between a US and a Russian sub very close to home. What we know from the memo is that when this incident took place, the US ballistic missile submarine James Madison was leaving its base here at Holy Loch, which you can see behind me, to head out to sea on patrol. Lying in wait near the mouth of the port was a Soviet submarine hoping to follow it, and it was at that point when the two collided. They then both surfaced before the Soviet submarine then once again submerged, and that, as far as we know, was the end of the incident. It's thought that James Madison suffered minor damage, but the issue experts are now pondering is how much worse could it have been?
It would be a diplomatic incident had it not, I think, it's my personal opinion, had that submarine not been so deep into our home waters that it's an embarrassment really to the American and British forces that it could get that close in.
The US continued its presence at Holy Loch until the Cold War ended in the early 90s. And who knows how many more stories will emerge from one of the most fascinating periods of our modern history. Andrew Black, reporting Scotland.
It's almost 20 to 7. A reminder now of tonight's top story. Scotland's exports to both the UK and EU continue to rise, according to new Scottish Government figures. And still to come, we meet the Scott sisters who've topped the classical music charts with their take on the works of Rabbie Burns. At some schools, the number of children arriving late or playing truant can be a real problem. But a primary school in Fife says it's found a way to help solve it. It's a surprisingly simple and cheap idea, encouraging the children to walk together to school in groups led by adults. In just 3 months, it's had a dramatic impact, as our education correspondent Jamie McIver reports.
Right, are you ready?
Liam's getting ready to get the bus to school, but the bus he's taking doesn't have an engine or a driver.
Right, have fun, darling.
It's a name for a group of friends going to school together. The walking bus runs to a fixed timetable and youngsters join at the stop nearest their house.
What do you like the most about it? Do you make lots of new friends on it?
Oh, most of your friends are there, so instead of just walking down to the school by yourself or just walking, it's fun.
Quite a number of schools have got schemes like this to help encourage children to walk to school, but here the effect has been quite extraordinary.
The primary school in Oakley covers some areas officially classed as disadvantaged. A relatively high number of children were arriving late or absent. That in turn was making it harder to improve academic performance.
The data tells us that we have gone from an average of 25 lates in a day
to 10, sometimes less than that. So that's a huge improvement. It's not perfect, but it's a huge improvement already. And teachers can get started in the morning first thing without thinking, oh well, you know, am I going to have 2 or 3 people coming in late? So they can get started straight away.
It's also helping the schools strengthen links with the community.
We wave to people that are sitting in their houses. We've been chatting to parents on their doorsteps. You know, parents that I probably would never have engaged with previously.
When the Scottish Government talks of closing the attainment gap, it has schools like this one in mind. The school is getting government money to help it take a number of other measures, but the walking bus costs virtually nothing.
We had one little boy who was almost never at school, and he's here every day. In fact, he's a graduate of the walking bus because he now comes on his scooter.
And Liam loves it. He's even able to get out of his wheelchair for some of the journey. Jamie McIver, reporting Scotland 5.
Well, now let's take a look at other stories from across the country. A man's been charged following a collision on Aberdeen's Union Street, after which 3 people needed hospital treatment. The incident involving a car and a bus happened on Monday and saw the bus hit scaffolding. Police say the 18-year-old driver of the car will appear in court at a later date. The Unite Union says action must be taken to address a shortage of emergency ambulance cover in parts of the Highlands. It reports that ambulance crews in Skye, Lochaber and Caithness say the service is stretched and point to the routine use of emergency ambulances for long patient transfers to hospital in Inverness. The ambulance service said it was aware of pressures and was working with NHS Highland. Meanwhile, NHS Highland says it's going to have to make unprecedented budget savings over the next 3 years. The Health Authority is being told it needs to cut around £100 million from its budget by 2020 and will need to change the way it delivers healthcare if it's to break even. Historic items belonging to a crew member who sailed with Captain Scott have been donated to the museum in Dundee, where his ship Discovery is now berthed. Frank Plumley was a stoker on the vessel when he sailed on Scott's first polar expedition. His family had donated the memorabilia.
I wanted to make sure that it was held together for posterity and for the family members and anyone else who was able to see it, yes. Because if it was broken up, I mean, it's actually historical, really. It's unique.
Vern Cotter is preparing for his final Six Nations campaign as Scotland head coach. And he's told BBC Scotland he wishes he could stay on in the job. The New Zealander will be replaced by Gregor Townsend this summer. The first match of the tournament is against Ireland in 10 days' time. Here's Rona McLeod.
This is the Hurlingham Club in London, and today is the official launch of the RBS Six Nations 2017.
Okay.
For Vern Cotter, it's the final time to take part in this traditional campaign opening event. But before travelling south, Cotter spoke exclusively to BBC Scotland, beginning with Scotland's tough Six Nations opener against Ireland.
Ireland under Joe, probably one of the top teams in the world. You don't beat the All Blacks just through luck. Really big challenge for our guys. When they see us in a fixture list, they know they come to the game as favourites and very confident that they will beat us. So look, our job is to try and surprise them somehow.
While collectively Scotland may need the element of surprise, individually there are some standout performers. Cotter believes up to 10 are worthy of Lions Tour selection in the summer.
I would have thought WP, if he's fit, would have been fairly close to being right up there. I think the two Gray brothers are pushing for position. Greg could be someone who could be great for the team. Finn's obviously playing some good rugby if he comes through Six Nations. I think he put pressure on. Duncan Taylor played very well last year. Alex Dunbar, you never know what Hugh Jones and those guys are going to throw out. Tommy Seymour's been a very good performer. And we finish up with Hoggy. He was there 4 years ago, and I don't think he's done any harm to, and perhaps even get a starting position.
Of his own position, Cotter admits disappointment. His tenure is almost over.
The SRU had made that known right from the outset they would like a Scottish coach. Would I have liked to have continued and kept developing the group? Yeah, probably would have. I know they love pulling on a jersey and you go out. national anthems and things. It's a great moment for players and as for coaches and people involved in the game. So it's been a privilege, the whole thing. So I've only got fond memories of it.
Baron Cotter. Well, from rugby to a piece of footballing history that could be made at Celtic Park this evening. Celtic take on St Johnstone in the league, and if they avoid defeat, they could equal a significant club record. And it's not the only game of importance tonight, though. Here's our senior football reporter, Chris McLaughlin.
Well, Celtic are 19 points clear of second-placed Rangers and are cruising towards their 6th league title in a row, so you would be forgiven for thinking this midweek match against St Johnstone would be fairly run-of-the-mill. You would be wrong because, well, this was Scott Sinclair scoring in a 3-0 win over Albion Rovers in the Scottish Cup at the weekend. Celtic's 25th domestic match in a row unbeaten. Now, the club record is 26, set by the famous Lisbon Lions, captained by this man here, Billy McNeill, the statue at the bottom of the famous Celtic Way. That was back in the late 1960s. If Celtic go unbeaten this evening, they will equal that record. That would then give them the chance to better the record, to break the record against Hearts in a league match here on Sunday. Now, speaking of Hearts, they are also in action this evening, a Scottish Cup replay against Raith Rovers. This was the Championship side scoring against Hearts at the weekend late on, a result that leaves the Hearts boss Ian Cathro under some pressure. Just one win in 6 for Ian Cathro. So 2 huge matches this evening for 2 very different reasons.
Now, I suppose it's fitting this Burns night that some of the Bard's well-known works are currently topping the classical music charts. They're performed by 2 sisters from Bearsden, whose rise to fame includes catching the attention of one of the world's most successful pop music producers with their version of one of his biggest hits. John McManus went to meet them.
The haunting melodies of some of Scotland's best-known works. And the sisters performing them at Glasgow's Royal Concert Hall, Laura and Sarah Ayub, the children of Egyptian parents who've added their own twist to Scotland's musical heritage. Performing with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, they've topped the classical charts with their hit Melodies of Scotland, which includes some of Rabbie Burns' best-known works. Now signed by the music label Decca, the sisters have been making music since they were young, often performing for visiting relatives.
We grew up with these melodies, and I think just one thing led to another, and we strung them along into a medley and thought, you know, why not release it in time for Burns Night?
They don't just have musical talent though. The sisters are adept at spotting opportunities.
Uptown funk, gon' give it to ya. Uptown funk, gon' give it to ya.
After they uploaded their own version of Mark Ronson's Uptown Funk to the internet, they were contacted by the songwriter himself.
Mark Ronson had chosen us, along with some other musicians, to go to Abbey Road Studios and record a new cover of his song Uptown Funk, which he ended up producing.
It was a fantastic opportunity. Now the sisters are working on their first album, making full use of their musical talents. And after using him for inspiration, how will they celebrate Burns Night?
Eating haggis, most definitely. We had haggis last week, but we'll probably have it again tonight.
The Bard would be proud. John McManus, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Very nice. Let's get the weather now from Judith.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and a very good evening to you. Well, for Burns Day, it was a predominantly dry day. There was a bit of cloud around, but it did break at times. And in fact, we saw this beautiful sunrise here, sent in by one of our weather watchers from Shetland. Tonight, it's predominantly dry. Some clear spells coming through the cloud. I say predominantly dry because we do have a wee bit of patchy rain out towards the far northwest. It's windy here. There's a brisk southerly wind, almost touching gale force at times over the West Niles and indeed across the Northern Isles as well. But it. That clears away, then dry. The combination of cloud and clear spells, the clearest skies tending to be up towards the north. And temperatures falling away sharply tonight for many inland parts, down to around freezing, if not below in some rural parts. But in contrast, we're holding them well above 6 degrees for the likes of Shetland and also across the Western Isles. So tomorrow morning, there's a slight change in our wind directions. It starts to bring its source from the near continent. It's already been very cold there, so it will be a much colder day across really much of the country. You will notice it, I'm sure, first thing tomorrow morning. Quite a breezy day. The strongest winds always along the west coast and across the Northern Isles. But we will see some brighter sunny spells coming through. Come the afternoon, I think it will be a dry picture across the southwest, across the Kintyre area, North Argyll as well. Look at the temperatures, though, 2 or 3 Celsius inland, but there's some sunshine at times as well. Across the northwest, the best of the sunshine in that wind direction. It'll be a lovely day here. Temperatures not even quite as cold, 7 degrees, and similarly across the Northern Isles. A bit more in the way of cloud for Shetland, but Orkney actually faring well, along with Caithness and also the likes of Murray. But there'll be a band of thicker cloud towards the east coast itself with that brisk southeasterly wind here, and it will feel cold in that wind as well. In towards the rest of the afternoon, nothing really changes, and as we approach the evening time, it will be a colder night than of late, with the winds falling a bit lighter, a fairly widespread frost developing as we head through the overnight period into Friday morning. So if we look at the pressure chart, we've got low pressure out to the Atlantic, high pressure across Europe. We're stuck in the middle, but it does mean we're still seeing a lot of dry weather. So it'll be a cold start on Friday, a lot of dry weather in the forecast with spells of sunshine. It will stay on the cold side. That's your forecast.
Thank you very much, Judith. Now a reminder of tonight's main news. Scottish exports are up across the board in the UK to the EU and other international markets. The Scottish Government figures show that sales from Scotland to the rest of the UK are 4 times as big as those to the EU. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with an update in our main evening news bulletin, which is just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from everyone in the team right across the country, enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.